evening, everyone. Welcome to the Stillman School's Integrity and Professionalism Convocation. My name is Joyce Strasser, and I have the privilege of serving as Acting Dean of the Stillman School of Business. Before I go any further, let me ask you to please turn off any mobile devices you may have or anything that may make noise during the program. So let's take just a minute to do that. As many of you know, it is our tradition here at the Stillman School of Business to come together regularly as a community to reflect on our core values of integrity and professionalism. This year, we decided to do that in a unique format, a Socratic panel. Our focus this evening will be on a management crisis, so the management of a crisis situation, the perfect context for reflecting on our core values of integrity and professionalism. Because after all, it's easy to do the right thing when things are going well. So when profits are strong, when the buzz about an organization is all positive. But it's really the test of someone's principles, both an individual's principles and a corporation's principles, when the going gets rough. For example, in a crisis situation. We have a wonderful evening in store for you tonight. We have with us leaders from the realms of corporate, media, and political arenas. Each one of those panelists is going to bring his or her unique perspective and background into the examination of a hypothetical crisis management situation. So let me now introduce our panel moderator, Mr. Richard Torrenzano, who will be playing a modern-day Socrates for the event this evening. Richard is chairman and chief executive of the Torrenzano Group, a strategic communication firm specializing in building and protecting corporate reputations, helping clients grow their businesses, and enhancing shareholder value. In that role, Rich has counseled chief executives and boards of major international corporations in the United States, Europe, and Latin America, as well as several heads of state. Rich has extensive hands-on experience in the world's financial markets. For nearly a decade, he was a member of the New York Stock Exchange's management and executive committees, as well as senior vice president. Rich has been instrumental in leading communications and public policy staffs at the NYSE, negotiating and planning the historic 1986 China-US Symposium on Financial Markets in Beijing, providing counsel to client executives following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, and coordinating White House-related activities for the NYSE Chief Executive Officer in his capacity as chairman of President Reagan's Board of Advisors on Private Sector Initiatives. Rich earned his bachelor's degree in behavioral sciences from the New York Institute of Technology. In 1985, he was appointed to the NYIT's Board of Trustees, and he serves as a member of the executive committee. Rich has received the NYIT's two highest honors, the President's Medal for Outstanding Service to Community and an Honorary Doctor of Letters. He also completed the executive program at the Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Please help me give a warm welcome to Richard Torrenzano, who should be in the front row somewhere.
Hi, Joyce. How are you?
Okay, we found him. Richard Torrenzano.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming. We want to do something different tonight. And I want to talk first about leadership and management, but I first want to talk about leadership. So I'm going to ask everyone for a moment if they would stand up. Would everyone please stand? I know it's hard at the 6 o'clock at night, but everyone please stand up. Okay, everyone put their hands in the air like this, wave them around, wave them wildly, and yell, woo, 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 woo. One more time, woo, 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 woo. Okay, everybody please sit down. That's leadership. How many people got up this morning, thought they would be standing in Seton Hall's auditorium, waving their hands around going, woo, woo, woo? I knew you were going to do that. You didn't know you were going to do that. And that's the difference between leadership and management. And in a crisis, leadership is what's important, not management. Management is a control of resources. Leadership sets direction and vision. And you get people to do unusual behaviors when they don't think they're going to do it. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. First, I'm going to take you through a little slide presentation, and I'll be shifting gears here all night with stuff. There we are. If we go back 2,200 years to ancient China had a character 2,200 years ago. This character meant danger. And the other Chinese character meant opportunity. And together they meant crisis. Most people think of crisis as a danger. Very few people think of crisis as an opportunity. Well, I want to ask two questions today if you're a corporate person in the room. How many people have faced a crisis or an attack? And how many people have a battle plan if the attack takes place? Very few companies in America, public or private, have a plan when it comes to crisis. So we want to talk about crisis today from the corporate arena. We don't want to talk about political crisis or a personal crisis or family crisis, all of which are important, but we're going to focus on corporate crisis tonight. And corporate crisis takes about 6 or 7 different ways to attack. First, it can severely damage the reputation of a company. Secondly, it can swiftly affect sales and customers. Third, it can dramatically impact earnings if you are a public or a private company. If you are a public company, it can have instant impact on your share price. It can absorb management's focus. You don't want to take management away from running the business, but when you have a crisis, they're all absorbed into doing something else. It can jeopardize employee brand, which is to attract and retain talented people. And finally, today, it can threaten human health and well-being, or it can be all of the above. Now, in this past year, you've all seen the headlines and all the news stories about BP, about HP, and so on and so forth. BP was a disaster. If you go back 25 some years ago, you were probably too young to remember this, but we had the Exxon Valdez in Alaska. And if I see that duck one more time on CNN, every year they run the duck on the anniversary of the Exxon Valdez, we're going to be talking about BP for years. Why? Because the courts and the insurance and all sorts of things are going to drag on between 15 and 20 years before this is all over. I said two things in 2002 and 2006. In 2002, in the New York Times, I said, in the past, you saw a gadfly stand up and annoy the CEO at an annual meeting. Most investors were attending the annual meetings, and they would be armed with information and substantive questions. But this questioning today, particularly, even more than 2002, is conducted in a witch hunt. How do you feel when somebody calls you, or how does the person who calls you feel when somebody calls you and you don't return their call? A reporter, particularly, who makes a call 2 or 3 times and doesn't get a return call, feels you're guilty. Or you don't meet that reporter's deadline. And we're going to talk to some very, very important people who are in the journalism business today. In 2006, I said, today, investors are not just questioning numbers, they have specific questions about how the numbers were vetted. And that went right back to the accounting scandals we saw in the financial markets just a few years ago. Let's talk about corporate attacks for a second. Demands come today on corporations from customers, from unions, from investors, from special interest groups, from activists and extremists, from local communities, from the media, from individuals, all over the place. And they demand regulatory change, new laws, political action, social policy, environmental action, or changes in corporate governance. These are the things, and pay. These are the things that are being put upon corporations today, all of which require resources and money, which takes away from profits to shareholders. Let's talk about what is a corporate crisis. What types of things can happen in a corporate crisis? Credibility, loss of management credibility, number one. Fortune magazine has a major study that just came out a few weeks ago for about, Ed, the 20th year or so? 81 they started, thank you. And it's basically the qualities that are the best corporations in America. And the number one quality for almost every year except one was the quality of management. The most important thing is, do you have quality management? Financial performance could cause a crisis. Disappointing earnings, missing financial expectations, fraud, lawsuits. We've seen all of this today across our headlines. People, sudden death or change, or a dismissal of somebody. Product services, default or recall, broken or lost contract, liability, litigation, all sorts of things. Pollution, BP was a pollution issue, if it was anything, and it was also an economic issue. And now in the last 10 years, we've seen terrorism. Back in the 70s, we saw terrorism in Asia and Europe, particularly in Italy, where they would kidnap high-level executives. And then it's moved on to what we see terrorism today. But this is all very important, and I think that's going to come back, unfortunately, in the next few years. The kinds of people involved in a crisis you're going to get to see today. Different kinds of people, different kinds of constituents that do different things with inside and outside a corporation to help them or to help one of their constituents. There's media groups, there's Wall Street groups, there's employees, there's customers, there's vendors and suppliers who are very important if you're a Ford Motor or an HP, because if your stock is being cut in half, vendors don't want to continue to deliver supplies, so that means you can't make your product. So vendors become very important, particularly in the manufacturing area. Government leaders, community groups, activists, and all these different people have a role to play against the company in a crisis. We're going to skip that one. So how will today's attacks unfold? My partner, Ed Orgon, put together this chart a number of years ago when we first started out in business. And this is exactly how every crisis unfolds in the corporate arena. You may skip a spot, but it always comes in this order. First, you have an initial reaction to a crisis. You have special effects, you have blame, you have resources. You have the political posturing that goes on from Washington to the local community to competitors. You have, who are those people? The players who saved the day, the lessons learned, and finally government comes in and says, this was terrible and we should have hearings about it and spend a lot of taxpayer money. Historically, management role was to stand inside the company and look out. Today, management has to stand outside the company and look in. And the reason that's important is because the rise of consumers, the rise of customers, the rise of customer service, which plays a much more important role than it did 10 or 20 years ago. This is very important. So, what are your messages and how do you want to be perceived? When you have a crisis, you don't want to say 40 things. You want to say one or two things. Most people can't remember more than one or two things. I have a little pad in my pocket which I use because I can't remember more than one or two things. I write them down. But you have to remember one or two things. And that's what you have to think about in a crisis. How many people here, since we're at a Catholic school, have seen the movie or read the book, The Ten Commandments? How many people can name me the Ten Commandments? These are God's messages that you have studied all of your life. In one way or another, whether you believe in them or not, you have been exposed to God's messages all of your life. If I were advising God, I would probably have cut down the 10 to 2 or 3, but I didn't have that opportunity. But here's God's messages, and we can't remember what God is telling us. Therefore, for a corporation, how do you expect an investor, a media person, an analyst, an industry person to remember more than one or two things? If we can't remember God's 10 things, you can't expect people to remember more than one or two things about a corporation. These are the 10 Commandments. And I think we probably all agree, unless you have 5 or 6 or 7 children, which you probably say the most important commandment is honor thy father and thy mother, we probably all agree that thou shalt not kill is probably not the most important commandment. And I probably would have started God there and maybe picked 1 or 2 more. So what is a perception? It's a belief, it's an understanding. I want everyone to close their eyes for a second, and I don't want anybody peeking at all. Nobody peeking. If I catch you peeking, I'm going to ask you to leave the room. So everyone close their eyes, and you're going to have a minute of silence, and then I'm going to say something. And after I say it, I want you to imagine what I have just said. You're peeking, my friend. You keep your eyes closed or you can't stay here. Okay, everybody close their eyes. The black cat played the horn. Okay, everybody imagine what I just said. And I always like to go to the back of the room because the people who sit, you can open your eyes now, people who sit in the back of the room always don't want to be called on. So I'm going to call on some people in the back of the room. Catherine, hi, how are you?
I'm great. How about you?
Is this working? Okay. Tell me about your black cat.
It's black. It's furry. Got a big hump on the back, and it's playing a horn.
Where was your black cat?
Just kind of standing out in the street.
Out in the street. Was it near a house or something?
No, all alone on the street.
All alone. What kind of horn was it playing?
Trumpet.
A trumpet.
Yep.
How big was the cat?
Normal size.
Normal, like a kitty cat.
Yeah.
And the trumpet was a normal size.
Yes.
Did you hear what it was playing?
Nope.
Okay. You're on the end too. Tell me about your black cat.
It's just playing a horn.
What kind of horn was it? Was it a trumpet? Was it
Trumpet.
a trumpet? Did you hear what he was playing?
No.
Okay, we're going to go to the other side of the room just to annoy some people who sit in the back. This guy says, please don't call on me. Please do not call on me. Hi, what's your name?
Paul.
Hey, Paul, tell me about your black cat.
He was just floating in the air.
Just floating in the air.
Yeah.
Were you in the same room she was?
Yeah.
Yeah? Was it like a cyber cat?
No, he was just in the darkness. It was
Just-
kinda hard to
just-
see.
just kinda
I wasn't
floating
really,
out.
I wasn't really picturing a actual background of him because.
Did he have a horn?
Yeah.
What kind of horn was
Cornet.
it? A cornet. Did you hear what he was playing?
Yeah.
What was he playing?
Seton fight song.
There you go. There you go. Let's continue back here. Let's see who else doesn't want me to call on them. How you doing?
Hello.
How are you?
Good,
What's your
how are
name?
you? Danielle.
Danielle, tell me about your black cat.
It was more like a cartoon cat.
More like a cartoon cat. So it was in a cartoon.
Yes.
And what kind of horn did it have?
A trumpet.
A trumpet. Did you hear what it was playing?
No.
How big was your cat?
It was small.
Who saw something else? Did anyone see anything else? Anyone see a cat on a 57 Chevy or a cat playing a trombone? How many people saw a cat playing a trombone? How many people saw a cat playing a clarinet or something else? Well, we forgot the picture tonight. I saw Dizzy Gillespie, one of the great American musicians of our time. I grew up in New York. I love jazz. A black cat to me is a man in a jazz club playing a trumpet. One of the greatest Americans of the 20th century. So what we just did is I threw something at you. I had your undivided attention for about 15 or 20 seconds. And if I went around to every single one of you, you would have had a different cat, a different size cat, different horn. Somebody a few weeks ago saw a pink cat, even though I said it was a black cat. Somebody saw a cat with a saxophone inside a 57 Chevy, playing both the saxophone and the horn on the car. Everyone is going to see different things. Now imagine for a second, just imagine you're at a press conference and you have 100 press people in front of you. And you're on the web, and analysts and all kinds of people are listening into this press conference. You're sending something out there that you think is terrific, but you don't know what's being received. And what you have to focus on today is not what you're sending, but how it's going to be received. We have great, I am sure, Joyce, you have great public speaking courses here. How many listening courses do you have?
We'll have one in the fall.
Very important. We all learn how to communicate one way. Guys are the worst at this. Women are much better at listening and receiving. But most of us send and not receive. Or, I didn't understand that. Or, I heard something else. Or I was in a taxi cab driver the other day. Guy was born in Brooklyn. Now, I know I have a New York accent, but it wasn't that heavy, unfortunately. And he was going to the west side while I was going to the east side. So it's part listening and part understanding what you're sending. Maybe I spoke too quickly, I don't know. But you have to say what's being sent. We're going to talk about where we get our perceptions from, but I want to spend a minute and talk about what's driving perceptions today. And what's driving perceptions for you as students between 18 and 25 was very different what driving perceptions for me when I was your age. But there's one thing about technology is power and scope, power and magnitude, size and magnitude that I want to talk about. And I'm going to give you one example of this. Bloomberg News, not Bloomberg the mayor, who happens to own Bloomberg News for about $6 or $8 billion worth. Bloomberg News today, 11 years or 12 years ago it started, has approximately 2,200 reporters in about 90 countries. And they put out about 2,000 stories a day. When I grew up with a newspaper. Newspaper closed at 5 o'clock. You had to have your story in by 3:30. Today, there's no deadline. It's 24/7. Bloomberg, the most important media in financial markets today, has no deadline. Do you think that changes our lives a little bit? Think it's changing perceptions a little bit? If you're not on the phone with a Bloomberg reporter when they call in 15 minutes, you are unavailable for comment. When you're unavailable for comment, you're guilty. BP, Hayward, I want to get my life back. Well, isn't that nice? A few people down here south who lost jobs in business would like to get their life back too. Stupidity, not understanding what he was saying, talking from his point of view, not from another point of view. All these things have an important place. Let's talk about traditional perceptions for a second. We got perceptions from lots of different ways. We got perceptions from television and radio, investors and analysts, trade association, advertising, media, consultants, all the traditional ways we got conception. This model is now broken, and there's new ways we get perceptions. Today, it's internet-based. How many people here have an iPhone or a small PDF in their pocket or on them? Almost everybody. Didn't happen 4 or 5 years ago. How many people have an iPad or something like that? How many people have a computer? Everybody has a computer. You probably have one you bring to school and maybe another one at home. The world has changed. But the world has changed and it has created different perceptions. Today, if you're the New York Times, or what's your name, son? Mike. Or you're Mike, and Mike has a blog, and Mike says something about something, and the New York Times says something about something. You don't really know who Mike is, but if he sounds pretty smart, you might believe Mike and not believe the New York Times. I wouldn't, but that's okay. Understand. But no, but it's true. So perceptions really have changed a lot. So what are the 10 things you should know about crisis? And then we're going to get to our panel. Number one, you have to accept and understand that a crisis can exist. Everybody likes to go to heaven, nobody wants to die. The biggest problem with crisis is saying, I have a problem. And that's the problem for a CEO, a CFO, a head of communications, or a dean. I have a problem, and I have to address this problem. And if you don't address it, it gets worse. Number 9, prepare for the what-ifs. There are different what-ifs in different industries. If you're a technology company, you have a different what-if than if you're a chemical company. If you're a trucking company, you have a different what-if than if you're an energy company. Different what-ifs are important by geography and by industry because you're going to have different kinds of problems that you're going to have to face that are the obvious what-ifs. Number 8, what do you want people to know? What are you telling them? What are your messages? If you're going to tell them the 10 Commandments, they're not going to remember them. You got to tell them 1 or 2 things. And it has to be important to them, not important to you. Important to them, not important to you. We're going to base that intelligence, we're going to develop a battle plan. You have to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you might just get there. True story. Number 6, never speculate, never fib. If you don't know something, say, I don't know, and get back to that person. Number 5, constituents can be your best allies or your worst enemies. Many of you may recall, about 10 or 12 years ago, right after 9/11, there was another plane crash, unfortunately, in Queens, New York, by American Airlines on its way to Haiti, and 360 people were killed. Rudy Giuliani, who was mayor then, called American Airlines a number of times, and it took him till the end of the day to get a response. Not that they weren't doing things, but you think they might call back the mayor of the city of New York in which the plane has crashed? How do you think he felt about that? He went on the air and said some things I can't repeat in this room. Wasn't happy. They can be your best friends or your worst enemies. You got to be an expert in all media. You can't be just an expert in the media on the internet. You can't be just an expert in the media of the old school. You have to be an expert in all media. You have to understand how it works and why it works and what people are thinking about it. And we're going to show you about that in just a couple of minutes. You can't lose sight of the profound effects that an attack or a problem can have on a company. We talked about this: stock valuation, executive time, customer perceptions, employee retention, vendor delivery. All these are important. You have to demonstrate sincerity and understanding. When the Exxon Valdez happened, Rawls, who was the CEO, did not go to Alaska. And he did not go to Alaska because he was advised by his lawyers not to go to Alaska. I would have kicked the lawyers in the butt and told them, I'm going to Alaska. Today, there are still people who do not buy Exxon gas or would not work for Exxon in that industry because of how Exxon handled that situation. All he had to do was go up there and say, you know, this is a terrible situation. We are going to cooperate with every state, local, and federal agency till we get to the bottom of this. I can't give you any answers right now. We're going to spend $2 billion, this is 25 years ago, $2 billion over the next few weeks to clean up this mess, and we're going to do everything we can to help the local economy. Thank you, and I'll be back to you in a few days. That's all he had to do. He didn't do that. And years later, it's the classic case, until BP, of what not to do. And finally, leadership versus management. You have to be a leader. You can't be a manager. What you're taught in management are all the wrong things in a crisis. I'll say that again. What you are taught as a manager are all the wrong things in a crisis. Because managers control and manage. Leaders take and lead. I got you all to stand up, wave your arms in the air, and say silly things. And you hadn't even seen me. You really hadn't even seen me. That's leadership. I have a platform. I use my platform to lead. Nobody this morning thought they were going to be in the auditorium going woo, 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 woo. And if you thought that, please let me know, because I have a horse I want to bet on tonight. Leaders are important in a crisis. They're always important, but they're particularly important in a crisis. There's 3 points I want to leave you. What is the clear path to victory? When you have a problem, where do you want to be? If you go what Yogi wants to do, you'll never get there. So we say in our business, what is the clear path to victory? Secondly, in a 24/7 world, communications and real intelligence is important. You must know what's going on. You must know what's being said out there. And finally, through clear messaging, communicate what you are doing. Will Rogers said, even if you're on the right track, you may get run over if you just sit there. And that's absolutely true. So with that, I'd like our panelists to be introduced, and we can start our Socratic panel. Our first panelist is Greg David. And Greg, if you'd start walking up, thank you. Greg has extensive experience. Ed and I worked with Greg for many years, for 25 years when he was editor of Cranes. He now teaches in some of the city universities, and he's a fabulous journalist. All of the bios in detail, by the way, are in your program that you have in front of you. Our second panelist is Tom Curran. Tom is the associate editor here in New Jersey of the Star-Ledger, and we knew Tom years ago when he worked for Newsday. Our third panelist is Pasquale Mena. Pasquale, besides being a fine attorney and having a great sense of humor, he happens to be the mayor of Red Bank, New Jersey, and Pasquale is going to play the role of the local official. Ron Levine is a very accomplished attorney here in New Jersey, and he will be playing the role of the outside counsel. Linda Willet. Linda is an accomplished business executive, currently senior vice president and general counsel of Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield in New Jersey, and she's going to play the role of the inside counsel. My partner, Ed Orgon, who I really think he needs a new picture, runs our firm day to day, and he has accomplishments in a number of different accounts, from NASDAQ to Amex to Lloyd's of London, where he handled the problems of 9/11. Al Kelly is the former president of the American Express Company. Please don't leave home without it. And is an accomplished executive and was head of information systems at the White House from 1985 to 1987. Bob Michel is his CFO, is the current CFO of Asta Funding, and as a CFO, you notice in his picture he is not smiling. Everyone else's picture is smiling. CFOs do not smile. And finally, our CEO, Frank Sorrento, who is president of New Jersey Community Bank. He is the chairman and CEO of this new 7-branch, growing like crazy bank, and he has a very big background in construction. Please welcome our panel, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we have an objective tonight, and our objective tonight is to show you a crisis and how a crisis could develop, and the different roles that these people are going to play in the crisis from inside and outside the company, which is going to give you all an opportunity to see these different roles and how they play in a crisis. Now, I will tell you that I briefed everyone before the panel tonight, or before the meeting tonight. I've asked the journalists to be very aggressive. And nobody on the panel knows the scenario which I'm going to throw at them. So this is all spontaneous. And the reason you want to make it spontaneous, because it's a lot more fun, and that's how a crisis happens. It's thrown at you one day, and it just happens. So if everyone would just think for a second about this. We have a company called Giant Technology. And Giant Technology is a big hit. And all of the people here are going to play a role in that. Frank being the CEO, Robert the CFO, Al the independent director of Giant Technology, Ed the counsel, Linda the general counsel, Ron the outside counsel, Pasquale is a local official where Giant Technology is headquartered, and Tom and Greg who cover Giant Technology as a company. Now, Giant Technology is a worldwide company. In Gloucester, based in this place, Gloucester, and they make high-end computers, particularly laptops, for movie stars, top managers, sports figures that are very, very expensive and very decorative. And Giant has plants, as you would imagine, around the world in Geneva, Grenada, Georgia, Guatemala, Greenville, Galveston, Guam, and New Delhi. So, Frank and Bob, Giant Technology is this fabulous company. It's about 3 years old now. You've just gone through an IPO, and you're thinking about future plans. You've decided with your board that you want these future plans to be, at least for the next few years, to be internal rather than through acquisition. Tell me some of the things, Frank, for a company like that as CEO that would be on your mind. What would you be talking to your management about? What kind of plans would you be setting? How would you interact with the CFO?
Well, if we were looking to go into an IPO, we would certainly...
No, you are an IPO.
We are an IPO.
You've done the IPO. You've been very successful.
It's successful.
Very successful.
Okay.
It continues to be successful. And you're now looking to make bigger plans to do other things, but you want to do it through internal growth rather than through acquisition growth.
So reputation would be a very big thing on my mind. How do we keep the growth to continue? How do we continue to create the brand? How do we make sure that our clients are happy with our product? How do we make sure that customer service is being handled? Do we make the proper investments in future technology, making sure we're current with what's going on in the marketplace today, and how do we do all that at the same time and continue to generate the profits that we need to support our stock price?
Good. Bob, what would you be doing as a CFO of a company like that?
Well, in follow-up to that, we would need to know about the financing of the plans, making sure that we have everything in place, whether it be from internally generated cash flow, outside financing through the banks. Do we have the capacity worldwide to achieve these goals? Are all plants and operations around the world set to take on the challenge?
Al, you're not only on the board, but you're the lead outside director as a public company, which all public companies now have to have. What are some of the issues that you'd be talking to Frank and the other board members about in terms of what the board's expectation is them over the next couple of years?
Well, I think the minute you move from the private world to the public world, a number of things change. Transparency goes up, the realities of pressure of having to produce earnings on a quarterly basis go up. And I think, therefore, as a new IPO'd company and a director, I would be concerned to make sure that we are doing all of the things that we need to do, that regulators and shareholders believe in what we're doing and that it's being done with the greatest level of integrity.
Ed, you're the head of IR and PR for Giant, and things are going quite well. You just come off this very fabulously successful IPO. What are some of the things that you're looking at in terms of what Frank talked about in terms of reputation, as well as some of the ways you might be promoting product?
Well, I think the first thing that I would always consider and remind my management team of is to avoid hubris. That we are successful, we are on a very fast track, but that doesn't mean we should not really pay attention to the environment and realize that it's, as Al said, it's high ethics and high integrity work that's going to continue to make us successful. I would make sure that we have in place very good customer sensing management, that our customer service is being measured on a continuing basis. The sensitivity environment is very critical, especially in the tech space, which moves at light speed. It moves at light speed. So I think those are the things I'd be advising management, that we really have to make sure we're constantly paying attention to that environment.
Pasquale, you're the local mayor of Gloucester, where Giant is based. And they are obviously growing, they're providing jobs, they're providing a tax base for the community. What kind of relationship do you want to have with Giant, and what do you do to help them or not help them?
Well, I would be looking for a symbiotic relationship, a two-way street. I would think that the local officials and the local community should know as much as possible about the local company, but at the same time invite the local company to participate as a stakeholder in what the community has to offer, the educational system, community neighborhoods, the cultural sphere, and get them fully involved and engaged so that they are in fact part of the community and their future is with the community.
Al, as the lead director and as a board member, would you require your board and Giant's management to be large shareholders in the company? And if so, how would you do that?
Well, I think you always want management and shareholder alignment in terms of what's best for the company. So typically what you would do in a situation like this is you would make sure that management is A, compensated in some degree with equity, and secondly, particularly for the most senior levels of management, you'd put a requirement in place relative to how much of their stock they should be holding over a certain period of time to in fact ensure that there's alignment between the general shareholders and the top management of the company.
Tom and Greg, you're going to be covering management. You both covered the IPO. Tom, you covered it from the local newspaper angle, or the daily newspaper. Greg, you covered it from both television from Bloomberg and maybe even wire service copy, as well as some blogs and other things that you do. Tom, tell me what you wrote about, or the kind of things you'd wrote about for a company like that, and what would you be looking from them over the next year in terms of your future stories with them?
I'd look to see how they intended to grow, how they intended to, what kind of neighbors they wanted to be in the area. I'd like to see how involved they are in the common weal, I guess.
Greg?
I'm sick and tired of writing positive stories about them.
Sorry?
I'm sick and tired of writing positive stories about them.
So what are you going to look for?
Anything.
And how would you find anything?
Well, I'm frustrated because there's nothing to find yet. But I've made sure that I've tracked every executive who has left the company.
And why would you do that?
But I've returned every one of your phone calls.
And why would you do that?
because they're the people who know the most, and at some point they'll talk to you.
And most probably they'll talk to you. So you'll talk to their customers.
Some of them might talk to you.
Some of them may talk to you. You'll talk to them. You'll talk to their customers. You may talk to a lot of different people.
And if it's the number one company on my beat, I'm working really hard to get an employee directory with emails and phone numbers.
Okay, so this goes on for quite a while. Greg is very frustrated. He continues to have to write good stories, and the company does very well. All of a sudden, Linda, George Grantano, who is a very famous technology person from Girard, Georgia, who happens to be a professor, full professor, at the University of Georgia, so he has enormous credentials, puts out a paper and says that your computers are flawed. And it's not so much your computers, but you're using a chip made by somebody else that you put in your computers that are flawed. And he has a lot of clients that he's purchased your computers for, including a CEO of a local company called Gladys Gladstone. And Gladys, to say she runs a company with about 100 people, is not happy that all her people are on your computers and none of them are working. So they file a lawsuit in federal court in Georgia, in Girard, Georgia. I didn't know there was a federal courthouse there until just now, but there is. And Gregory Gray, who is representing Gladys, files the lawsuit. So the lawsuit is filed, and tell us how you know about this. How would you might know about a lawsuit?
Well, there are any number of ways that it might come to me. It could have been filed with the company, served on the company. It would come to me as the general counsel of the company. It could have come to me through an outside counsel. Many times outside counsel are looking for lawsuits and reporting to companies when new lawsuits are filed. It could have been in the local newspapers in my state.
So you might not even know that a lawsuit is filed.
Or I may not know it's out there.
You might be served, right? And what does that mean, Linda?
So when a lawsuit is filed, it has to be served officially on the company to give company official notice, and usually the general counsel is for the contact for service of process. So the complaint lands in the company.
Whoa. Very few of us here are attorneys. I'm going to slip on this. What does serving mean? Does someone come into your office and slap you with something? What do they do?
It could come through the mail with registered mail.
Just regular mail?
Yeah, regular mail.
Or Federal Express?
Well, usually it would have with it some type of return receipt that you would have to sign. Somebody in the company signs for it. It could be somebody in the mail room, somebody who would just set it on the desk in the mail room, or maybe if I'm lucky, they actually get it up to me.
Okay. Ron, you're the outside counsel for Giant, and Linda calls you and tells you what's going on. What are the first steps that you advise the company to do?
Well, did she get a copy of the complaint?
She does have a copy of the complaint. It is in writing. It is not electronic yet.
Okay. Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a list of people who are going to know something about it. We're going to have a meeting, and we're going to talk about.
How do you find out who knows anything about it?
Well, she's going to talk to the people in the technology office, I guess, and the design department, and have a meeting about it. We're going to want to eventually or very quickly get a notice out that documents are held so that there's no destruction of documents.
What does that mean, documents?
Well, I mean, one of the concerns going on these days is that there's spoliation, which is a big word, which means destruction of documents. And the minute you know that there is a potential lawsuit, a company is supposed to send out an internal, what's called a hold notice, to protect records and make sure that everything is preserved.
Okay, Lindy, I'm sorry. You have this suit. When do you tell Frank or Bob about the suit?
Actually, with all due respect to my favorite outside counsel, I haven't called him first. What I did was, when I got the lawsuit, I ran down the hall to Ed's office. And I said, Ed, you need to know about this because we just got this lawsuit.
Why Ed?
Because Ed is the guy who may be facing with the outside.
He may be the guy who
faces with the outside.
He's faced with the outside.
He might have to answer questions from the
Which
outside.
means he's going to have to answer questions from who?
It could be from reporters. It could be from shareholders, people in the company or in the town that we're working in. Could be even the folks who are filing the lawsuit.
So now you two are talking about this lawsuit. And you're sharing with Ed the contents of the lawsuit because you have a physical copy of it. And what do you do, Ed?
Well, I think actually Ron tipped off what would be the right next step is really to, I would alert Frank and Bob, and along with Linda, give them just a top line, not to panic because we don't know enough
So
now.
literally, you take the lawsuit, the two of you would walk down to Frank's and Bob's office and say, we just got a lawsuit, and you sit down and talk about it, assuming everyone had about 15
Yeah,
or 20 minutes.
we would say we don't know what the substance of this is. I'm sure Linda would say, speaking for you, if I may, Linda, that we don't know what the merits are. We're going to investigate this with our technology folks and get back to the appropriate
So
time.
now you're back, now you are talking to Ron again. And what are the questions you're asking Ron, and what initially at this stage, Ron, are the answers or the questions you're asking her?
So I'm asking the questions first, I guess. So we know where the lawsuit was filed. I'd want to know something about opposing counsel, about the court, about Ron's first impressions on the allegations. We have put the litigation hold up. Ed and I decided that we had a message that went out to everybody in-house that you need to hold documents because we have this litigation. But we consulted with Ron as to how broad that should be. And then I would say to Ron, what else should we be doing in your opinion, Ron?
And I'd be checking out the lawyer who filed the lawsuit to find out if he does this for a living or not, and this may be one of 1,000.
Why is that?
Because there are a lot of blackmail lawsuits being filed every day, and I may say to counsel, or the in-house counsel, let's find out if this is for real or not. Let's find out if this is a real lawyer. Let's find out if what's going on down there.
So you're going to verify who is suing you?
Right.
Go ahead, Ed.
Along the same lines that Ron suggests with the lawyers, I would also be looking at I said earlier, to really manage and continually monitor your customer service. So the first thing I'd look at customer service, see if there's any kind of cluster of complaints with this particular model of computer, chip, or whatever the situation is, and see if there is some kind of unusual data feed, which would start to give us a factual basis if there really is a problem.
One of the really important questions that I would be asking Ron is what should the scope of our investigation be, and how should we conduct it?
What do you mean by the scope of the investigation?
In conducting an investigation, we need to be very careful that we're not creating information that could create a later issue for us, a larger risk. So what I would want to know from Ron, and he's raised a number of good questions. Is this a real lawsuit? What do we know to date? And what do you recommend, Ron, that we do in terms of investigation? Can we cover it with privilege? So for those of you who aren't lawyers, can we conduct the investigation in a way that the very conduct of it, not the facts, but the conducting of it and what we find is privileged?
Okay.
And I would probably bring him in to do that.
Let's go back about an hour, and you guys have just finished your initial talk about the lawsuit, and now you're going to walk over to Frank and Bob. What are you going to tell them, and Frank and Bob, what are you going to ask them about this? Why don't you go first, Linda?
So what I would do is alert them to the lawsuit, give them the basic allegations. If I was able to give them some idea of what the risk was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad do we think this is? Might not be able to do that because it's kind of early days, but make sure that they have enough so that as management, the senior management in the company, they can help in the decision making that then has to be done as to what do you communicate to the board, and who else do you communicate to?
So Frankie, you're going to say, oh my God? What are you going to say when they come in with this lawsuit?
No, I think the first thing we want to know is it true? Do we have a problem? We want to know, is it one model, all models? Is it this chip? Does it affect all customers? Have there been complaints that have come in the past? To what extent do we think there is relevance to this lawsuit?
And who's going to do all of that?
It's a good question. We're going to get head of technology. We're going to talk to people that are involved with customer service. We're going to try to look at who has called in the past, what records we may have. We're going to want to know very quickly, is this true or isn't it?
Bob, what are you going to be doing in that first initial meeting? What kind of questions are you going to be asking as the CFO?
Again, getting the truth of the matter in terms of is the suit legitimate, and is it something that can be taken care of quickly with a call to the vendor, that type of thing. If it's going to escalate, then calls probably have to go out to local our providers, our professional service providers, especially insurance carriers, for not only the general liability, but actually directors and officers, to make sure that that's adequate. We're adequately covered there. It's kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff to make sure that, we are prepared to move forward. Our financial statements were adequately reserved for something
What does that mean, a reserve for something?
That our product liability, that we've been accounting for these types of product liability.
And you have the right
reserves.
insurances and so forth.
Correct.
Will you give your lead director a call to let him know about this? And when would you do that? And what would be the conversation between you and the lead director?
I think I'd want to know relevance first. I think I'd want to know, is this just a
So let's
fishing
say-
expedition? Is it, if there's any reason to believe, and probably if we're being served with a lawsuit at this point, and it is on top of an entire product line, somebody knows something, and we're going to find that out pretty quickly.
Okay.
And if that's true, and there is this issue, there is an issue, we don't know what the issue is, but there's an issue, probably pick up the phone and call my lead director.
So Gregory Gray, Gladys's attorney, is no stupid attorney. Not only has he served the company, but he's mailed a copy of the lawsuit to the media.
I think he did more. He called me yesterday.
And this has made Greg very happy. But more importantly, Tom, why has he mailed you a copy of that lawsuit?
Because he wants me to call up the PR guy and tell him that we know that it's going on.
And what does that do?
That sets in motion a series of conversations that if the legal person at the firm hadn't told the CEO yet, she's going to tell him now.
Greg, you're at a wire service. This is a brand new company. They have had a very successful IPO. You now have a copy of this lawsuit, which is something you've been chopping at the bit for since they went IPO because you've been tired of writing good stories. What do you do when you have a copy of this lawsuit? Do you call Ed right away? Do you do stuff?
No, I took it to my editors, and they were not happy, and they were not ready for me to go on the story because they want me to make sure that there's some substance here. Because the moment Bloomberg runs the story, the stock will tank. So they're not letting me write the story right away. I have to call the attorney, and I have to talk to the professor before I'm allowed to do anything.
Okay, and why?
They want to make sure that this is legit and that there's some substance to it, because we're going to move the market we're going to move the stock when we write the story.
Will you have other people in the office, other journalists working with you on this story, perhaps?
That depends on how big the company is.
Okay.
You didn't tell us how big it was.
All right,
if it was
Tom-
very big, you bet. If it's a mid-size company, probably not.
Tom, you're the local journalist. You write the daily newspaper. You're the business editor.
Right.
This is an important story for you, if indeed it's true. You obviously would do some of the same due diligence Greg has done. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, at first I'd contact the lawyer who filed the suit. I'd do the same kinds of things that the company is doing. Try and figure out whether he's someone who does this all the time, if it's someone with standing as a lawyer, if it's someone who is always working in the federal courts and is known to the other lawyers in the federal courts as a serious lawyer, somebody who knows what he's talking about. He doesn't bring suits frivolously or just because he's trying to get his name in the paper. And once I've figured out who that guy is, and then I read the complaint, and I try and determine what the value of the story is compared to everything else that's going on that day.
You know, my editors are really skittish because those reporters at the LA Times launched a huge series about how Toyota had a big problem with their cars, and the federal government just said there wasn't any problem with the Toyota cars, and there weren't any people, there were no electronic problems. The people were just putting their foot on the gas, and they don't want Bloomberg to make the same mistake.
Pasquale, again, this was no stupid attorney. This attorney you find that has not only mailed you a copy of the lawsuit as the local mayor, but the entire town council. Pretty smart move on his part as an attorney from Georgia. You were at Giant helping them cut the ribbon when they opened the building. You were there for the IPO. You've been very supportive of them in the community. What do you do as the local official, town council member, mayor, when you get this lawsuit? Do you call Frank or Bob? Or do you call Ed? What do you do with that?
Well, I would do what politicians do best. I would probably duck. The first thing I would do, frankly, before calling the...
no, that's what you would do.
I would have to check the records to see whether or not the company or the corporate officers had made any contributions to any election campaign that I may have had over the years to make sure that there is no tinge of any tie-in between the company and myself. But what I would do is I would thereafter call the company, and I would like to speak to the president, to the chairman of the board. And I think my interest would be to try to stabilize the situation without referring to what the facts of the suit would be, because there are people who work for the company who live in town. The company's resources obviously are important in the local economy. The last thing I would want to do is create a panic. But again, by reinforcing the company that it is a valuable community stakeholder without getting into the merits of the lawsuit.
Okay, so let's throw some pepper on this. Everyone does all their checking. You media people check, the lawyers check, the PR people check, you guys check, and everything's legitimate. It's federal court. He's a legitimate attorney. He's noted for litigation, and you get an initial feedback that afternoon that it's all legitimate. And Tom, you call Ed and say what?
I say, Ed, I have a copy of this lawsuit that's been filed by so-and-so, the lawyer, and it seems that there is
Gregory Gray.
By Gregory Gray, and it seems
who represents Gladys Gladstone from Girard, Georgia.
And other G's. And I say, Mr. Gregg has told me that there seems to be a problem with your laptops. They keep exploding on the desks in the I forget the name of the other G lady who's had her whole company outfitted with these things, but they're exploding all over the room, and I wondered if you've seen this lawsuit and you have any comment.
Now, Ed, you've huddled with everybody. Have you prepared a statement? Are you ready for this?
Absolutely, and I think that's the critical element is to, in any situation like this, is to have very close working relationship and a very prompt working relationship with Chief Counsel. We have already assessed what the real downside risks are, worst case downside risks of this with Bob on the financial side, such as what's the revenue take of this product, what kind of impact it is if it permeates all our products, et cetera. In talking to Tom, I know Tom because he covers the company. I would say yes, we've received a lawsuit. We are reviewing it right now and investigating it. We can't comment specifically on the lawsuit, but I can tell you these three things. And this is made up, obviously, for this case. No,
you'd make something up? Is that what you're saying?
No. It depends. Clearly, if as you know, Tom, this particular product has won numerous awards. PC Magazine named it the best pick last year. We have had a very positive reception to this product. I will also add that it is our commitment in our mission that we provide the best, safest, best products to our customers, and we're going to investigate this situation very carefully.
Now, before
we'll get back to you.
One second. Before you have this conversation with Tom, you've obviously had a conversation with Bob and Frank and Linda. What was that? What were you asking Frank and Bob, and what happened in that conversation?
Well, I think it's along the lines we just talked about. I mean, the first stop is I would coordinate this with Linda because we don't want to make any statement that could bite us later in a lawsuit. But that's why we wouldn't comment specifically on the case. And this is what I would advise Frank and Bob, that we won't comment on this case, but there are certain things we should be talking about our company and our product that are positive and are proven track record. And remind the reporters of that. The key thing being is that as we all opened up this discussion, that this company operates with ethics and integrity, and we're going to investigate this because our customers are most important to us.
Frank, share the direction with us you've given Ed before he makes that call back to Tom.
Well, if somebody told me our laptops were blowing up on people's desktops, I wouldn't be so talking rosily about our company and how great it's doing and how great our products are.
What would you be saying?
We'd be having an argument, and we'd be talking about, hey, listen, I get it. I understand that there's legal implications here, and that, this lawsuit has merit, and there are things that we need to do as a company, but we also have a liability here. We've got laptops that are exploding.
You don't know if you have a liability.
Well, I'm being told that they are, and by the way, I have a document here that one of our researchers told us that there was a risk of this happening in the past, that these things overheat and there's a chance of a fire. And, you know, as we're looking through, as we're talking to people on the floor, because I've already brought our management team in to say, hey guys, what do we know about this? We're starting to find out that there's some truth to this. And so I'm not so quick to say this is the greatest company in the world. Yeah, I want to say that, but I also want to say, I want to start thinking about how are we going to get the message out to our client, our customers? How are we going to mitigate this? And how are we going to get it, how are we going to get to the finish line starting right now?
You've now had a conversation with Al.
Absolutely.
Al, tell us about that conversation you're having with Al, and Al, tell us what the kind of questions you're asking Frank, and also tell us, are you going to contact the rest of the board, or in an individual basis, or as a collective group, or what?
Well, depending on the severity of this, I'm certainly going to pick up the phone and call Al. I'm going to tell him what I found. I'm going to tell him what I think the responsibility of this company is, and I'm going to make a strong case for what I believe this company represents. And it represents integrity, it represents a future vision, a future product.
What does that mean in real terms?
It means if we don't do something about recalling this product, if we don't get in front of our customers, both in the social media space, if we don't get out in front very, very quickly, people are going to switch products. We're going to lose our customer. We're going to lose everything that made us great, and we're going to lose it quickly.
Al, what are you asking Frank? And what are you going to do with the rest of the board?
Well, I think, number one, what's relevant here is that this is a new IPO. I think if once Giant is 10 years old, they'll be getting served with lawsuits every day, and I wouldn't expect to hear from the CEO because they'll be battle tested. But I think what's relevant is the fact that the company is new. Now, I still don't know whether these damn things are blowing up or not. The original source of this is from the media, and I'm not sure whether we're running with that or not. I think one of the things that a lead director needs to be for a CEO in a situation like this is a support and a supporter and advisor, and I would want to make sure that my CEO is neither overreacting or underreacting to this. And so I would certainly be asking a number of more questions, and unless I was confident that this was a big deal, I would not, as the lead director, contact the rest of the board nor call them together. I would suggest to the CEO, if I thought that was a good idea, that he ought to reach out to individual board members, and I would probably do it individually. There's a question in my mind right now whether we're dealing with a lawsuit or we're actually dealing with a crisis in the marketplace, and there's a big difference between the two.
Ron and Linda, I'm going to come back to you in a second. Greg, you have this fabulous story now, and it's all been verified. You verified the problem with the computers, that they're not functioning. Whether they're blowing up or not, we don't know, but they're not functioning. Companies who've taken on these computers as products are not being able to function as companies because their computers are not working. You now have a solid story. What's your conversation with Ed?
Well, I'm calling and saying, you have 15 minutes to tell me what's going on, and we're going to hit I presume it hasn't appeared anywhere else yet.
No, because Tom's a daily, and he has chosen so far not to go on his blog. Is that fair, Tom?
So the story hasn't been anywhere, so I called him to say, I verified the lawsuit, I verified that there's a real substantive problem here. We're going to give you 10 minutes to give us a response before the story hits the wire.
Why 10 minutes?
Because Bloomberg needs to act immediately.
And tell us what you would write, basically, and who you might quote in that story.
A lawsuit filed in blah, 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 Georgia, suggests that their computers are faulty based on the complaint of this CEO of this woman. We have a professor who's done a study that says it's flawed, and then I've got background on how the company is such a high flyer, the IPO, blah, blah, blah.
Ron and Linda, you're now facing this lawsuit. It's real. Ron, tell us the advice you're giving the company in terms of what they're going to do next. Now, you're both aware that these calls are coming in. Linda, what are you asking outside counsel? Ron, what advice are you giving her?
Well, I'm asking who's taking control of the situation. It sounds like you've got 10 different people running around, and that's not the way to handle this situation. I want to know who's in charge, who's making the decisions, and who's controlling everything. I'd also be getting somebody, I'd be looking in my law school yearbook to see who lives down in that town and have somebody pay a visit to this lawyer and find out what's going on here, because this doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, is he looking for $1 million? Is he trying to drive this company out of business. I mean, this whole
So he
plan-
might have a different motivation.
And I'd be paying him a visit. I try to get a hold of the report that his expert did. I want to get as much information on the ground because my goal is to take care of the situation as quickly as possible if I can. Put out a story, say it was only this, there was something wrong with the electrical wiring in this town or something. I don't know. But I'm looking for some way to control the situation, and what I'm hearing is that everything is sort of going out of
Bob?
control.
Yeah, and a half a step before all this should be a call to bankers, accountants, and insurance people.
Why?
So they don't hear it on Bloomberg. They hear it directly from the management of the company.
Okay, why is that important?
Then from the independent accountant's viewpoint is, what else have you been hiding from me? And you can't go into an audit on the defensive like that. So, you have to, be upfront with them. Here's the situation. We're looking into it, and we will keep you advised
That's
all along the way.
accountants. Why insurance and why loan officers?
Well, your banks, you don't want them to call, if it got to a situation, you don't want them to look in the fine print and say they could cut your financing off. Insurance, you just want them to be aware that a lawsuit has been served, and that all the coverage and the people that they are in contact with at the carriers are aware of it. They don't like surprises. And then, again, the accountants are the key, because they could, be very instrumental in, giving an opinion, on your financial condition.
It would be March 29th.
Of course it would. I should have thought of that.
I think the key thing is what Ron said, is that we have to know what the facts are. Once we know what the facts are, you have two options. You can play defense, you can play offense. Based on my discussions with Frank, understanding him and understanding his personality, we clearly want to be in a position at the right time to take control of this agenda. Right now, that lawyer down in Georgia has control of this agenda, and he is driving the media. So we want to be in a position to perhaps, if we know the facts, and if you remember one of those slides, say you know the facts, we take control and we put out the statement about it and about what we're going to do to solve the situation. We're going to do a recall, we're going to send a replacement chip, whatever it may be. Again, that's part of the scenario we will have to play. But I still have that call from Greg on the phone.
Let me stop you for a second, because I want to move this along, because you're throwing everybody's throwing a lot of stuff out there. Greg, your story's run. It ran on Bloomberg about 4:30. The market's closed. Okay, so the market can't react as a market, but it could react into off market. Tom, you've now put something on your blog, which is much more effective than waiting for the next morning for the paper itself. You both covered it intensely. Tell me first, Tom, then Greg. Tell me what you've written. Tell me who you've talked to. Tell me the calls you've kind of made. You've talked to Ed and so on and so forth. Then Greg, the same thing.
All right, well, I talked to the woman who owns the company, and I got her at the hospital where she'd been taken after the computer blew up on her desk and the fire started, and she was being treated for third-degree burns. And then I talked to the ambulance driver that took her there and brought her out of the...
Why the ambulance driver?
Well, because she couldn't, the fires were so intense around the computer that, they had to call 911, and so cops came and the ambulance came and took her to the burn unit.
So all this is on your blog about 5 o'clock
Absolutely,
that afternoon.
absolutely, yeah.
And you're probably getting a bigger readership of your blog than you're getting for the paper the next morning.
Well, I went into the social media and I put in, giant technology and fire, and 100 things popped up, because it turns out that not only in this little town in Georgia have these fires started, but also at other places in other parts of the country have these laptops caught fire.
So have you talked to other clients of Giant?
I haven't talked to the clients of Giant. I've talked to the people who wrote the blogs. And
okay,
I sent them
which probably are clients of Giant.
Sent them emails and said, I'm doing a story on this fire at the Georgia plant of this company that was using the Giant technology laptops, and I was wondering if you could share your experiences with me.
Greg, your story's now run. Tell me what you're going to expect as a second story in the market the next day, so on and so forth?
Well, in addition to the story running at 4:30, Bloomberg Television put me on at 4:45 because they thought it was an important story. So they have a camera in the newsroom, and I went and did a live interview. Well, my stories, I didn't get to the ambulance driver. I sort of focused on the facts of the lawsuit and got one analyst who covers the company to talk to me. But I've been suspicious about this company for a long time, so I now called up every story I could find on the database about the company, make a list of customers, anybody who's ever been quoted on the company. And at Bloomberg, I have to work till 10 o'clock at night anyway. So I'm starting to make my phone calls, and I'm calling everybody who's ever been quoted on the company to see what they know about this.
So you're really both doing some very serious research.
Yeah, I saw the blog post, and he got to a couple people, and my editors are definitely not happy about that. We don't need to write immediately unless everybody else gets on it because the market's closed. So I've got a few hours to see what I can turn up. The clips give me the names of sources to call. I've got my list of former employees to call. And I'm watching the tech blogs because the tech blogs are really good and they're going to be jumping all over this with expertise I don't have.
We're going to stop here because this gives you a flavor of the dynamics that take place inside a company. But what we want to do now is I want to give you all a chance to ask the panelist questions, and I think we have some microphones. So if you'd like to ask a question, if you would just raise your hand, and one of the assistants here will go over to you. And please give us your name so we know who you are, and please direct your question to one of the panel members. Who'd like to ask the first question? Yes, ma'am, right back there. Wait 1 second, we got a mic coming to you. Just give us your name first.
Paula Alexander.
Hi, Paula. How are you?
Good.
Who would you like to direct your question
to? Robert.
To Robert, okay.
I think you mentioned that you were possibly going to do a reserve note on the report, the financial report and the annual report. At what point would you make that determination?
I'm sorry,
did I misunderstand? I thought you were talking about having a footnote in your annual report talking about this litigation?
Well, at the time of the initial report, to make sure that we're adequately reserved in our product liability accruals. If it comes down to all these things just cascading and happening, then of course we would have to determine what the impact would be to the company, and we would set up a loss reserve for that, yes.
Good, thank you very much. You have a second question, or?
Well, at what point would you make that determination you're specifying a loss reserve?
Oh, it would be determined at the time, whatever, like, as Rick mentioned about March 29th, if all of this came due and the facts were clear by today, it would be, if it were a calendar year, it would be effective the first quarter.
And what does that mean for everybody else in the audience?
Well, you would know, if you know the extent of the loss, you would reflect that in your financial statements and disclose it to the public to say that here's the exposure and here's the impact on the company.
Good, thank you very much. Next question, please. Come on. Yes, sir, right over here. Yes, you, sir, with a nice sport jacket. She's coming to you. She's running.
Not quick enough.
Your name, sir?
Good evening. My name is Stephen Layler.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
I'm good. Question, I was intrigued by outside counsel's comment with regard to encouraging senior management with respect to crisis management. And in particular, the point was made, who's leading? I'm wondering if outside counsel received kind of a comment or a view as to dissension among senior management's ranks as to the leadership, whether it be by a quorum or a consensus of people or an individual, what counsel would do to rectify that, and who counsel, in this particular example, outside counsel, do they believe, is the second part of my question, is the right person to run it?
From my experience, and this may be showing my bias, I prefer to have the in-house counsel as the lead person or among the lead people. I don't like the CEO running the show, though the CEO might want to take control of the situation. I really think there are many legal problems coming down the road for this company, huge problems, and we're all going to be impacted about it. Actually, in reality, and I've been through many of these situations, the phone calls to me are going to really slow down now, and you're going to be really in the middle of it every single day. You're going to have class actions filed, you're going to have shareholder suits filed, the stock's going to go down. This lawyer down in Georgia is going to be out of the picture before you know it, and there are going to be huge class actions filed, and this company may be history. That's why I was just shocked by the story, because I would think this lawyer down there would probably be looking for a quick payday and not turning this into the case of the century.
If I can just answer the other part of that, I agree 100% with what Ron said. And quite often in companies, you will see the lawyers taking the lead and being a point person for a whole host of really good reasons. And I would be up at night worrying about the same thing. And if as the gentleman to my left added to this wonderful hypothetical, if we could determine that that was actually accurate, then one of the things we would be advising Frank is people first. We've got people injured here. We have to think about, how do we respond to all of that? And I think you all, living here in New Jersey will remember Johnson & Johnson's, McNeil's response to the Tylenol issue, which was really a very good way to respond to a crisis. I would be worrying, the market's closed, I would be worrying that if all of these facts come out the next day, what happens to our stock? Stock begins dropping. We get shareholder suits. What are our obligations to report to the SEC, and who are the other people that we have to disclose information to? So the lawyers would be marshaling all of that, working with all of our colleagues to be prepared.
Gentleman over here.
Gabino Roche. My question is for Frank, actually, as the CEO of the company, for Giant, I guess that was the name. And I know this is in the time span of 24 hours or something, and this might be too early for you, but in this day and age of instant gratification, and in the talk that we heard before about perceptions from your consumers, and the Exxon Valdez example you gave, I'm sure your counsel would advise against this, but a lot of people in the age of social media talk about connecting with your clients, showing empathy or sympathy in this case, getting out there in front. You are the face of the company. What measures are you considering to do at this point, even though it's early, where you might actually ignore a little bit of the advice from your counsel just to show that the company cares more about the people than the bottom line, than just protecting themselves? Because if you don't have that, regardless of how you overcome this, your customers won't come back to you, right? So.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly, you phrased exactly what I would be concerned about. How do we show our customers that we care? Because that was what our company was built on. That's why our IPO was so successful. And so I will be pushing back to both internal, external counsel. I will be pushing back to everyone who's in the room at the time. And I will be looking for a place where we can put a face on this event, and that face is probably going to be me, and create some sort of record to say, okay, we know we have a problem. We know or don't know what we're going to do about it, but we care about our clients. We don't want anyone using our product at this point. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to come out with some sort of statement, and I'm going to be pushing for some statement that our lawyers are going to say okay to, probably begrudgingly. They're going to sanitize it 22 different ways to Sunday, but we're going to get to something that we can all agree with that's going to allow me to demonstrate to our client base that we care about them.
But if you do that, the stock will tank.
I'm sorry?
But if you do that, the stock will tank.
Yeah, but that's not, I get it, and I understand that that's a short-term problem that we're going to have, but we're going to have to put a face on this problem. There are actual people getting hurt here.
Gentleman in the back on the end.
Yeah, Frank, just real quick though, would you be willing to sit with Gladys with her recovering from her burns and whatnot? I mean, that's the humanist part of this, right?
We didn't get to that point. Gentleman back here.
Thank you. My name is Drew, and my question is for both Ms. Willet and Mr. Levine. In this kind of situation, what are the advantages of having both an internal and an external counsel, and where do your duties extend, and how do you interface both running your respective sides of the legal issues?
Well, first of all, I'd like to marry your question to his question and say I don't think we should assume that your internal counsel is going to automatically take a very conservative, negative, thou shalt not speak. I think you will find in really good companies today, and hopefully if they have really good general counsel, the general counsel will be there addressing the kinds of things that Frank was talking about and giving the advice that, let's put people first, let's worry about that. Yes, we've got to worry about the stock price and all of these other things, but assuming this is accurate information, giving what is the right good corporate citizen thing to do. Seeking the advice from outside counsel to buttress that and make sure that we're not missing anything. So in-house counsel, partnering with outside counsel to make sure that we're really getting it all right. And I'll turn it to Ron.
I'm sitting for about, 5 to 10 different specialties right now in this example, but you have securities, you have litigation, you have insurance, you have patent, you have all of these lawyers that you're going to want to bring together as outside counsel, which in-house counsel may not have that expertise. Also, there are all kinds of issues of privilege, and as a lawyer on the outside, I may be retaining experts and hiring people to try to preserve the research we're going to do. We're going to hire somebody to find out what the root cause was of this, and I'm going to work on that to try to protect that information. So that's another one of my outside counsel jobs.
Ed?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to what Linda said about chief counsels. I've been in this business a long time. I got the gray hair to prove it. And I can tell you, when I started in this business many years ago, several decades ago, the conflict between external communications, public relations people, and lawyers was monumental battles. I can tell you now, what Linda said is exactly right. The chief counsels and the chief communications officers of companies, if they're smart, are simpatico. They both understand the incredible pressure of the constituents and the general public opinion, and they both advise CEOs and senior management that way. I just wanted to add that point.
I just want to say one thing about the statement which we were talking about communications. From my experience, within the first 3 days, many companies are sending emails around internally which are going to kill the company. And the CEO is getting angry about the proposed statement that's coming out, and they're saying, but we're killing people, or how did this happen? And these emails will later come out in litigation, and they're going to be very damaging for the company. So one of my jobs is to try to make sure that this internal communication is being done in a way that's not going to be terrible later for the company.
This gentleman right here.
Yes, the independent director indicated he's not sure if this is a tort or product liability case, and if so, it would seem that somebody wouldn't want to go viral or nuclear with it, or is this maybe a stock crisis of some sort, an equity crisis? To what extent does the independent director at that point say that this may be an attack on the company? At one point, do you start asking those kind of conspiracy questions and start looking for the darker side of the motivations, and then how do you protect what is a rapidly escalating crisis from becoming something made worse by how management starts dealing with each other?
Well, I think the number of cases where somebody's actually set out to make an attack on a company in an organized fashion is very small, and I think it's extraordinarily unlikely for a company that's just been IPO'd. I still think there's something that Rich said in his opening and Ed has said here on the stage, which is the facts are critical. There's a big question mark here whether this is this a lawsuit that's been served by potentially either whether it's a suspect or a credible attorney down in Georgia, or can you really Google Giant Technologies and fire and find 100 incidents of an issue? If it is the latter, forget the lawsuit. The hell with the lawsuit. Then we're into an issue of product integrity. We're into an issue of how really brand and company reputation. And quite frankly, we're potentially in an issue, looking at an issue of executive honesty. Because as a board member, if we've had numerous cases of our core product actually showing a defect that caused some kind of, I don't care if it's a spark or a fire, it doesn't matter to me, and it hasn't been aired to the board, or worse, actually dealt with in a very, very direct fashion, that's a very different issue. And again, I think that facts are critical here, and if you overreact to bad facts, that's a problem. If you underreact to good facts, that's a problem.
And this is where the fog of war is, because you're never going to know the facts in time. And your first statements are not going to be able to be definitive. And the question is how much time I've been given on the story and how good I am, and whether, because we're not going to find 100 comments on blogs, whether in 2 or 3 days I turn up the heat because I find a lot of good things, exposing problems in your first bland statement.
We try to touch today on a lot of different points of view. I think we try to show you the dynamics that take place inside a company, the potential dynamics, the various positions. So I would like you to give Frank, Robert, Al, Ed, Linda, Ron, Pasquale, Tom, and Greg a great big hand. And I'd like to turn it back over to Joyce.
Thank you, Rich. My job at the end here is to give thanks. And so I would like to just reiterate how wonderful our panel was. They, again, had no idea of what they would be asked to weigh in on this evening, even until they came up and heard about Giant Company. So they did an amazing job. And again, let's give them another round of applause. I think we would all agree that this was truly a rich learning experience. Now, speaking of Rich, let me also thank Rich for the masterful job he did as panel moderator. You may not know this, but Rich has been working since October with the Dean's Office to bring this together, to get all these wonderful panelists, and to really shape this event. So I am so grateful to Rich for his work. I also have to give thanks to my colleague, Professor Henry Amoroso. Henry was the oh-so-important connector who brought Rich to us and who has worked tirelessly to recruit folks for the panel. So, Henry, thank you so much. Now, some of my colleagues. You have seen running around, up and down, there she is, Assistant Dean Lee Onimus. Lee, thank you. In the audience with us tonight is Pam Dungy, who helped us with all the wonderful marketing materials that we have, the web invite, the web display, the beautiful programs, the nice invitations, all of that from Pam Dungy from our PR and marketing area. And then, long gone today, but I'm sure they're thinking about this event, Carol Flynn and Joanne DiStefano, administrative assistants for Stillman, who with Lee organized all the logistics of this event and did everything from ordering the tables, the flowers, to the tent cards in front of the participants here. So I'm very grateful for their help as well. And I should point out that Lee, in thanking her for this event, Lee has been in charge of the 7 events that we've run at the Stillman School, or that we will be running at the Stillman School, starting last Thursday, 7 events in 3 weeks. So she has had an enormous job, and everything so far, so good. I think this is number 3 checked off our list. And speaking of events, please mark your calendars for our next big event, which will be Tuesday, April 26th, when we formally open our market focus room. So our market research center will be officially opened on April 26th, and we'll be welcoming Jim Chambers from Kraft for that opening. So mark your calendars. And another reminder, undergraduate students, well, not just undergraduate, any students, tickets to the Stillman Dance are still available, and we'll be selling through the end of the day tomorrow. Now, my very last thanks is I'm most grateful to the people who attended today. Thank you so much for being here to hear all these words of wisdom from our panelists, and thank you for your great questions. We appreciate the time that you took, so give yourselves a round of applause. I'm going to ask our panelists to stay on the stage for just a moment so we can get pictures, and then we'll be inviting our panelists and our special guests to join us for a reception in the 6th floor faculty library. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.